感谢于参在热情洋溢的讲话，我们也记住他的期许，我们会继续努力。非常感谢，参赞在很短的时间内能光临我们的这个论坛。下面呢，我们就进入这个主题演讲环节。我们今天主讲的第一位主题演讲嘉宾是 UCBC 主席韩世新先生，他主讲的主题演讲的题目是 BC 省直通中国的北美门户，最优的人民币北美结算中心。
Thank you so much, Councillor Yu, for your words. Next, please welcome former Deputy Premier and Minister of Finance and current President and CEO of Advantage BC, Mr. Colin Hanson, whose topic is BC, the most RMB-friendly jurisdiction in the Americas and gateway to China.
掌声有请。
Please give him a warm round of applause.
这次演讲是英文的，所以需要那个同声翻译的，请戴上耳机。非常感谢。
Ni hao, and thank you very much for the invitation to join you this afternoon and to share some thoughts on why British Columbia is an ideal place from which to do international business, and probably as important, the very important role that Vancouver can play as a gateway, not just between Canada and China, but between the Americas and China. And I will share with you some reasons why those are factual statements. As soon as I figure out the technology. Am I pushing the right button here? Oh, I probably got to aim it this way, right? There were 3 buttons. I tried 2 of them. I just didn't try the right one. So first of all, I want to explain a bit of background of Advantage BC as an organization. We've in fact been around for 30 years. This is our 30-year anniversary. And a lot of people mistakenly think that we're part of government. In fact, we are a non-government organization. In fact, we receive no government funding. We're funded by our members, which are primarily private sector companies. But the role that Advantage BC was set up for was to encourage international companies to locate business activities here in British Columbia. And that has been quite successful over the years. And we now have a total membership base of about 168. But in terms of the outreach that we do to companies around the world, there's many of those companies have chosen to locate in British Columbia because of the work of Advantage BC over those years. So its primary mandate is to promote a program that the provincial government set up, which is called the International Business Activity Program, which provides companies with tax rebates on their profits on specific financial service activities, which I'll talk to a little bit later in my presentation. So I guess the first question when a company is thinking about where to expand or locate activities in the Americas is why Canada? And I think there's several good reasons for that. First of all, Canada is considered by the Forbes and Bloomberg organizations to be the best country of the G20 countries in which to do business. And over the decade, from the middle of the last decade to 2014, Canada has led all of the G7 countries when it comes to economic growth. And in fact, during that time of the global economic downturn in 2008 and 2009, Canada was one of the shining lights when it came to the economic activity during that international financial crisis. So we have what's in place, some very strong treaties with other countries that make Canada a very attractive place. Not least of all is the North American Free Trade Agreement that has been around now for many decades and really allows access from Canada to the entire North American economies, Mexico and the United States. So companies that locate in Canada can enjoy the benefits of that free trade agreement for North America. The other one that we are hoping will get ratified soon is the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, and that is an agreement that I hope one of these days in the future will also include China, because I believe that free trade between China and Canada will have considerable economic benefits to all of the countries involved, and we are actively encouraging both the government of China and the government of Canada to proceed with bilateral free trade agreements, which I think would further enhance Canada's role as a place from which to do business. The other one is the Hong Kong-Canada Tax Treaty, which at first look, you may question why that's relevant in terms of trade between mainland China and Canada, but it is a very important tool, which I'm going to elaborate on a bit later. And also, we have the lowest total business tax of the G7 countries, and again, I've got some slides that will explain that a bit more detailed. But I think the other one that I think we point to often is the fact that Canada has the soundest and most stable banking system in the world, and that's according to the World Economic Forum, based out of Switzerland, which has given Canada that ranking now for 8 consecutive years. So I mentioned to you the issue of international tax rates that companies are facing. And so if you look at sort of the general tax rates around the world, Canada as a whole is the business tax is made up of 2 components. It has a federal corporate income tax rate of 15%. That applies wherever you are in Canada. But each province also has its own provincial corporate income tax. British Columbia happens to have the lowest of the provincial corporate income tax rates at 11%. So the combined rate is 26%, which you can see compared to many other countries in the world is very attractive. Now in British Columbia, because we have this tax rebate system for companies that do international financial activity, they can actually get their corporate tax rate down to just 15%, which is very attractive even when you compare that to the Hong Kong tax rates or Singapore tax rates. No, I went and skipped a slide. There it is. So I mentioned the Canada-Hong Kong Tax Treaty, and this has been in effect now for just a year and a half. So before this tax treaty was put in effect, the withholding tax on things like dividend flows would have been 30%. And that's the same in Canada then as it is in the United States today. So under the Canada-Hong Kong Tax Treaty, it actually allows for a tax, the elimination of any, the chances of double taxation, and it provides for a withholding tax of just 5%. Now we know that the majority of Chinese companies as they go abroad usually used Hong Kong as a gateway, as a portal to their other interests around the world. So companies that choose to locate in Canada that have that base of operations in Hong Kong can benefit from that 5% withholding tax. Now, Canada also has a tax treaty with the United States, which also provides for a withholding tax of only 5%. So a company that decides to locate in the United States and flow dividends back to China via Hong Kong would face a 30% withholding tax, but if they did it through a Canadian holding company, they can in fact benefit from 5% and 5% for a considerable savings when it comes to taxes. So the other is when it comes to the total cost of doing business. And there is in some circles a reputation that Vancouver is expensive. Well, the facts don't bear that out. So KPMG, one of the largest international accounting firms, every 2 years does a study of the total costs of doing business in cities around the world. And they benchmark this against the 8 leading US cities that they benchmark at 100, and they compare every other city around the world against that benchmark. So as you can see, Canada, Vancouver, has a total business cost of about 5% less than the average of those US cities, and only Toronto and Montreal are slightly more favorable when it comes to business costs. But if you look at the total tax costs, we have tax rates in British Columbia that companies are facing, and that includes your corporate income tax and other taxes on top of that that are about 60% lower than you would find in the United States. So when you look at Vancouver in particular, Vancouver is being seen to lead economic growth of all of the cities across Canada. So the Conference Board of Canada recently has come out with new projections that actually show growth rates that are even more favorable to Vancouver. So this is really the economic engine for Canada in British Columbia. And also when you look at what's happening to the economic growth by province, BC is exceeding all of the other provinces when it comes to the economic growth that we've seen in the last year, but also the forecasts that are expected in the years to come. So Vancouver is also, I think, has a reputation of being one of the most livable cities in the world. And the Economist Intelligence Unit ranks Vancouver at number 3 when it comes to livability. Toronto, interestingly, ranks at number 4 and Calgary at number 5. So it's interesting that you've got 3 Canadian cities that are ranked among the top 5 when it comes to livability in the world. And also when you start looking at the management of the provincial government tax burden, and British Columbia now has had 4 years of surplus budgets in the provincial government. And that is combined with the fact that they are the only province in Canada that now has a AAA credit rating, along with the government of Canada itself. But we are the only province that has that AAA credit rating. So why is that important? It's because when you look at the fact that British Columbia has among the lowest taxes in the world and lowest taxes in Canada, there is no pressure on the provincial government to suddenly start increasing things like corporate tax rates or personal income tax rates in order to meet their budget requirements to run the provincial government. So we've seen success, as I mentioned, of attracting companies from Asia to set up operations in Canada. And in particular, there's activity, or the Agriculture Bank of China has established their Canadian head office here in Vancouver. Bank of China has a very significant operations here in Vancouver and have, over the past number of years, shifted all of their trade settlement and trade finance activities for all of North America to their Vancouver offices. And also the Industrial Commercial Bank of China, of course, also has substantial activities here in Vancouver, and they are the clearing bank for the renminbi settlement hub, which I will talk about in a minute. So BC also is the province that enjoys the best trade relationships with China. And you can see just over the period of the last 14, 15 years that the percentage of British Columbia's exports going to the United States have decreased while the percentage going to China have increased very dramatically. We've seen huge increases in the sale of dimensional lumber, for example, and other resource products, but also technologies and significant growth. There's no other province that even comes close to having that percentage of economic interdependence with China. So in terms of Vancouver itself, in terms of some of the advantages of doing business, as I mentioned, the total cost of doing business is lower. Corporate and individual tax rates are lower in BC than in, certainly on the corporate tax rates than anywhere in the United States, and on the personal income tax rates is better than most jurisdictions in the United States. So we also see things like the lease rates for downtown offices being 60% lower than in San Francisco, 40% lower than Seattle, which is an important component, but also things like health insurance costs. For companies that locate in the United States, they can see health insurance costs for their employees being up to 10 times larger than they are in Canada. And even when it comes to hiring the workforce, we have a highly skilled labor force that is typically at labor rates that are very favorable compared to other comparable cities around North America. And I think the other thing that's important is immigration. You know, and I know many of you that have been through Canada's immigration procedures probably feel that they're unnecessarily complicated, but they are certainly easier to get residency status and work visas for employees in Canada compared to the United States. One of the competitive advantages is just geography. First of all, is time zone. So we have, on the Pacific coast of North America, the advantage of overlapping with the start of the business day in East Asia. And that's important when it comes to real-time communication on a business file, for example. And the other advantage that we have is we are in the same time zone as the Americas. So being able to facilitate international business from a base in Vancouver has that very real business day opportunity. So the other one is in terms of just ease of transportation. You know, I was, a year or so I was talking to a businessman from Vancouver who on very short notice had to fly to Hong Kong on a business trip. And it was right at Chinese New Year. So he phoned up his travel agent, and all of the flights between Vancouver and Hong Kong were full. So the travel agent said, well, I can get you to Hong Kong via Los Angeles. So it was the only thing available, so he said, okay. So he gets on the flight to Los Angeles, 2.5 hours, gets off, changes flights, gets on another flight that's direct from Los Angeles to Hong Kong, and of course, 2.5 hours into that flight, he looks out the window and he's flying right over top of Vancouver. So I think as you know, I know that in China, I'm told that the maps that are used in classrooms are similar to the maps that are used here in Canada, in that they are flat maps of the world. And you would think that if you wanted to ship goods from Shanghai to North America, it would be logical to ship it right across the Pacific Ocean just north of the Hawaiian Islands. But in fact, that's a longer route because all of those trade routes come up over the North Pacific, whether that's the shipment of goods or air flights. So the first major international airport that you come to anywhere in North America is Vancouver. And if you're shipping goods, the first ports that you come to, if you're shipping containers from China, is the port of Prince Rupert in northern British Columbia or the port of Vancouver. So Vancouver is one of the busiest ports. It's the fourth largest port in terms of tonnage in all of North America. And I won't go through all of these, but you can see there's some pretty impressive stats with the amount of volume that the Port of Vancouver does. But the one thing that's important is the time saving. So if you're shipping that container from Shanghai to, let's say, Chicago, if you bring that container in through one of the British Columbia ports and then by rail to Chicago, those goods will arrive in Chicago a day and a half to 2.5 days faster than if they came in through the port of LA Long Beach. So the other thing I wanted to touch on was the role of the renminbi settlement hub for North America. And at the outset, I mentioned that British Columbia is determined to build a reputation for being the most renminbi-friendly jurisdiction in the Americas. And about 2.5 years ago, the Minister of Finance, Mike DeYoung, asked us at Advantage BC if we would lead a private sector push to demonstrate support for Canada being designated a renminbi settlement hub. And up till then, there had been 9 other settlement hubs announced, but they'd always been cities. And so the push was not to have Toronto or Vancouver designated, but to in fact have Canada designated. And that is in fact what the People's Bank of China announced in November of 2014. And as I mentioned earlier, the ICBC Bank was designated as the clearing bank, and they have a settlement teams based in Toronto, and they also have settlement teams based in Vancouver. And what's important about the Vancouver settlement team is that they operate up till 5:30 each day, allowing for that very real-time overlap with the business day in China. And so this is an area that the BC government has been very supportive of, and Advantage BC has been encouraging Canadian companies to seize the advantage of using renminbi as a settlement currency rather than the US dollar. So when this was announced, the Ministry of Finance in China, I can't read that, but I trust most of you can, but I am told it says that the Canadian settlement hub is the settlement hub to serve North America. So when this was announced, that was a surprise to us, because we thought it would just be Canada, but to have the Canadian hub designated as the hub to serve all of North America was certainly an extra bonus for us. So the renminbi opportunity is important, and I think first of all, British Columbia's support for the renminbi has been a very important signal to China that British Columbia, as a jurisdiction, as a government, wants to encourage the internationalization of the renminbi. British Columbia in November of 2013 became the very first foreign government ever to issue a dim sum bond, an offshore renminbi bond. And that was in the amount of 2.5 billion renminbi. A year later, they issued a second dim sum bond to the value of 3.0 billion renminbi. And in November of last year, the People's Bank of China designated British Columbia, the province of British Columbia, as the very first foreign government ever to be approved for the issuance of a panda bond, which the province issued the first one in the value of 3 billion renminbi in January of this year. So I mentioned the International Business Activity Program. So this is a program that allows for that rebate of the 11% BC corporate tax to companies that profit from international financial activities. So it's one of the reasons why the Bank of China, for example, consolidated all of their trade finance operations in British Columbia. It's because they have a very real benefit from this program. So it's quite diverse. So if you're involved with companies or you know of companies that are looking to locate in North America, by setting up in British Columbia, these kinds of international financial service activities, they can benefit from these programs. There's also an area that includes, outside of financial services, includes life science patents and clean energy patents as well. There's also a personal income incentive so that companies that are registered to use the tax rebate program can also, employees that come into British Columbia to work in that field can benefit from a rebate of their provincial personal income tax over a 5-year period. So it has a 5-year phase out on it. But just to give you a sense of some of the eligible activities for this program, including things like leasing and trade finance, dealing in securities, dealing in foreign exchange, export and import financing, ensuring international risk, financial advice and research, wealth management for non-residents, management of foreign portfolios, and management of administration of investment funds. Those are just some examples, but if you're interested in more information on that, we would love to talk to you. There's 4 of us on the staff at Advantage BC. I'm not one of the Mandarin speakers, although some of you in the room may know my colleague, Jimmy Mitchell, who is Vice President of Advantage BC, who is a very fluent Mandarin speaker, and we would love to tell you more about the benefits of doing business in British Columbia. So with that, I thank you again for inviting me to be here today and to share these thoughts with you. 谢谢。